So last night's primary election closed the door for one election season and opened the door for another. The November general midterm election. It's going to be here before you know it. But what does some of the tea leaves have to say from last night? Joining us now with some analysis is Wirepoints President Ted Dabrowski. Here with Springfield's Morning News, I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Ted, what's your big takeaways here from last night's primary here in Illinois?
Hey, good morning, Greg. Well, the big takeaway is that I think, good old grassroots, straight talking, telling the truth about what's happening in Illinois won out. And I think what we're finding is that we've gotten so extreme in Illinois, so extreme in the policies, and we can talk about that in a second, that people don't want the same old, same old. They want change, and so they went with outsiders, and outsiders won. And they won big, and so it's a pretty big signal.
Well, and those outsiders being Darren Bailey being outspent, Ken Griffin putting money behind Richard Irvin, and even Jesse Sullivan coming in with $10+ million. But Bailey was able to raise money and raise awareness about his campaign, and ultimately, in a six-way race, got more than 50% of the vote, which says a lot. But you also had, for instance, the Attorney General race, where Thomas DeVore secured that nomination, not really spending much money at all, despite having Steve Kim in the race, who was on that slate of candidates with Richard Irvin. And it's pretty fascinating to see what some of those issues were raised and the awareness that people across the state had of those two candidates in particular. What do you think some of the issues that these candidates were talking about that were in plain conversation with the voters?
Well, I think part of it is that a guy like Darren Bailey has been talking about the issues. He's got a record. He started taking on Governor Pritzker early on the COVID management, and so that was a clear issue. And then the other part was that somebody like Richard Irvin didn't want to talk about the issues, didn't face the press very often, didn't want to answer questions as well as he could have, and so he created a pretty clear differentiation. And somebody like Bailey is talking about the issues. He's gone directly and pretty harshly about the level of crime in Chicago. It's extreme there. He's talked about the handling of COVID, and the governor's executive orders have been extreme if you look across the country. If you look at the equity-focused policies in schools and sex ed and things like that, we're extreme in the country. Same thing for green energy. Same thing for the exodus of companies and people. So, it's not, we can't change this state with marginal policy changes. And so I think one is a bit of a repudiation of the establishment Republicans, that they're not bold enough and big enough and willing to take on the system, and an acceptance that we got to break a few eggs to try to get changes.
Ted, the messaging already from Governor J.B. Pritzker is that Bailey's an extremist, and he lumps him in with President Donald Trump. Bailey did get the endorsement of the former president, but how do you think that rhetoric from J.B. Pritzker about Trump's a homophobe, xenophobe, racist, twice impeached president, and Darren Bailey's an extremist, how do you think that's going to fare with voters heading into the November election?
Well, what I do think is going to be fascinating is a very clear delineation between a Governor Pritzker and Senator Bailey. Huge differentiation. And if you haven't watched Governor Pritzker's speech in New Hampshire yet, you should, because he really leans into his policies. And I think that's good because Governor Pritzker has taken Illinois furthest on green energy. Many would say it's too reckless, too fast. We may have brownouts this summer, so we have to let people know these issues and let them choose. Governor Pritzker's going to lean in. He's going to push against Trump. He's going to lean into everything he supports, and let the Illinois voters decide. But I think when you start looking at Illinois and where it ranks on debts, where it ranks on gas taxes, second highest in the country, highest property taxes, the levels of crime in Chicago, all those things, I don't know if Governor Pritzker can support those and get the votes of Illinois, all good for him. But I think there's a big delineation. Bailey has to do a great job of differentiating. Here's what we should look like. Here's what it should be like in Illinois. And he's got to make his case. And he's got to convince a bunch of people to cross over.
Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints. One last thing here. He brought up Pritzker's speech in New Hampshire. I did watch some of that. He used some pretty choice words that we can't air on the radio when talking about Republicans and their support of the Second Amendment, but he raised a whole host of other issues as well. Do you think that the governor is seeking the White House after what you saw in New Hampshire and some of the previous things he's had to say around the country?
Yeah, I think you can only reach one conclusion watching that speech. It's a yes. Of course, that's just my guess. But you watch that speech, you watch him lean in, you watch his rhetoric, you watch his energy. It sure looked like it. It'd be hard to say no after watching that speech.
And we'll see if that works into the equation heading into the November election. And, of course, we'll check in with Ted Dabrowski on that and all kinds of other issues. Ted, something else I got to talk to you about, not right now, but they just finally released the annual audited financial report for the state of Illinois through the Auditor General yesterday. A lot of people not looking at that. Of course, you've got the election that took precedence, but I think I'm going to have to touch base with you on that here in the next few
Greg,
hours. All right?
What financial problems in Illinois? What are we talking about? We'll get to those later.
There's no need for an audit. Who cares how your tax dollars were spent, right? All right, Ted, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon, okay?
Thank you.
It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield.